You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is an author, communications trainer, and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share with your friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
So, Alper, what's on your mind this week?
Hi, Matt. Well, remember how I questioned about what you meant by this line in our topic list, talk to the dog, and you clarified that?
Sure.
Well, there's a second one, which
Okay.
I want you to clarify.
Ooh.
What do you mean by vocabulary is a zip file?
Ooh, vocabulary is a zip file. I probably use this phrase a lot more than I should. It probably confuses a lot of people. Here's what I mean.
Okay.
But before I get into how vocabulary is zip file, there are two basic things that you need to know about, or you need to be thinking about. One is, you know how like a zip file on a computer works? You know, somebody has a bunch of data
Yes.
and then they zip it up. Okay, so when I say vocabulary is a zip file, think of it that way. So what's a zip file? A zip file is something that has a ton of data in it. And then when you unzip
Yes, and the other files, yeah.
Yeah, so before it's unzipped, you look at it. If you're on the outside, before it's unzipped, you look at it and you can't see what's inside. It just looks like a zip file. But once you open it up, you see a bunch of stuff in there. So think of that. And then the other thing that's important to keep in mind with this phrase is, you know how images tend to stay in people's heads longer than words?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, you have, I don't know, an image of a little 5-year-old girl in a blue dress, and that will stay in your mind a lot longer than the words 5-year-old girl in a blue dress. So keep those two things in mind. So
Okay.
What I say what I mean when I say that vocabulary is a zip file, just mean that you don't always have a lot of time for your presentations. You know, we've talked before. A couple weeks ago, I gave an example of a guy who had to give a 2.5-minute presentation, and you gave an example of some people who were giving 4-minute presentations. So you don't always have a lot of time to show people images. Sometimes you have to use words and hope for the best. Sometimes you don't have time for images. Sometimes you don't have time to fire up PowerPoint. Sometimes you just have to hope that the words can do the job. And so what I mean by vocabulary is a zip file is that some words enter a person's mind and they just kind of sit there. They're dead. They don't really do anything. Like, for example, an example of this would be thirsty. You know, if you use the word thirsty, if you say, I'm thirsty. When you take that word thirsty and you put it in somebody's head, let's say an audience member's head, it doesn't really do anything. There's very little imagery associated with the word thirsty. Like maybe there's a glass of water. You don't have a lot of images in your head, but take another word that you could use instead. Okay. If you want to use really thirsty, another word that you could use, let's say you use the word parched instead. If you use the word parched, let's say that you're speaking to a group of people and you say, or you put on your slide or something, the word parched. And this word enters the person's brain, enters the audience member's brain. And it's kind of like a zip file. It opens up and it has more in there than you put in there, or more in there than it had before it unzipped. You know, because now you've got these images rotating or flying around this person's brain, and they're thinking of, like, if you use the word parched, they're thinking of, you know, somebody crawling through the desert. They're thinking of the desperate feeling that you get when you haven't had a drink of water for 3 or 4 days. They're thinking of a vulture flying overhead, ready to swoop down and eat the bones when the person dies. You know, so there are certain words.
That's very vivid. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are certain words that have this vivid visual effect that other dead words don't. And when you have to give a really short presentation, I mean, when you have to give any presentation at all, but especially when you have to give a really short presentation where you don't have time to fire up PowerPoint, it's really important to use words like this that are going to put images into the people's heads, because when they walk out of the room after your 2.5-minute presentation, you need their head to be filled with images, and you don't have time to show them those images on the screen. So that's what I mean by vocabulary as a zip files, that some words, they're dead words. And when you put them in there and the person unzips them, they look exactly like they did before you put them in their head, like thirsty. But there are other words which kind of mean the same thing. But when you put them in their heads, when you put them in the audience members' heads and they unzip them, they mean a lot more. And one of the most common pushbacks that I get on that, I do a lot of work with international teams. And so there's mixed levels of language. And you'll have, like a team in Argentina talking to a team in Israel, talking to a team in Chicago, talking to a team in China somewhere. And you'll have, some people are just barely learning English, and some people are completely fluent in English and they've been speaking it their whole lives. There are other people in the middle. And so one of the common pushbacks that I get on this is that, well, maybe not everybody in the audience knows what parched means. And that's absolutely true. That's a good piece of feedback. And so I just wanted to give people a suggestion for how they can deal with that situation. And if you've got, so the problem is that you've got people who, in this example, thirsty and parched. If you've got a situation where everybody on the call is going to know what the word thirsty, but you want to use the word parched, and there are only a few people on the call who probably know what that means. So one thing that you can do is you can use both thirsty and parched. And here's an example of how you could do it. You could say, there was this guy and he was thirsty. He was really thirsty. In fact, he wasn't just thirsty, he was parched. And he was so parched that he was so desperately thirsty, so parched that he would, if he saw somebody with a glass of water, he would kill that person with his bare hands. And so now you see what I've done with that example. I've used the word thirsty a couple times. I've used the word parched a couple times. So if you know the word thirsty, there's something in there for you. If you know the word parched, there's something in there for you. And I've used a distracting image, killing somebody with their bare hands. I've used a distracting image to distract people from the fact that Matt has just used, a simple vocabulary word and a more complex vocabulary word. And he probably did that because there are some people in Argentina and there's some people in Chicago. And we want to distract people from that because we don't want them thinking about that. That's why the distracting image is there. And so, yes,
I like that.
So anyway, that's a common issue that I see when working with international teams where some people are just learning the language and other people might be fluent or near fluent or have been speaking it their entire lives.
That's very interesting because I, for one, didn't know the word parched, and I was going to ask you when I had the word, but since you described it, I know and I understand what it means. And it will be interesting for me to see the next time we record the podcast, if you ask me what the word was, and I think I'll remember it.
Yeah.
I think I will remember it, which means that you have done a great job of introducing not only a new word, but at the same time, remembering your point. So if this podcast was not about presentations, but the dynamics of hydrogen with oxygen or something like that, namely water, it will be critical for the audience to remember the word parched. And if I remember it the next time you and I meet, I think it will be a huge successful tip. I love it.
The next time we meet, if you remember what the word parched means, then I'll know that my theory has worked. And I'll know that
because I was completely oblivious to the existence of this word.
Yeah, and I'll know that the theory has worked, Matt's theory has worked, and Matt is not just wasting his clients' time when he teaches them this technique.
Yeah, but we already knew that. Come on.
Yeah, we would all like to think so. All right, so that's all for today. That's all I have on my mind today.
All right, that's great. One more thing clarified on my mind from this list of topics that we have.
Okay.
Let's see what we're going to have the next time.
Wait, are you looking at the list right now?
No, I mean, no. I meant we will see what life will throw at us to speak about in the next recording.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what is on that list? I'm not looking at that list right now.
Well, we have a lot of things to cover, actually.
Wow.
We did vocabulary as a zip file today. We did persuasion. I think that's a horse that we we have beaten so many times.
The whole persuasion and know your audience thing, we've definitely beaten that horse many times. We've flogged it to death.
There is one about boring but obligatory presentation topics and what to do about them. This could be interesting.
That's a good one. Boring,
given
but
that
obligatory.
Most presentations out there are utterly boring. We could talk about that.
That could make like 20 episodes right there. How to deal with that situation.
So let's start beating that horse.
Let's start beating that horse.
Let's give persuasion a break for a while. But I'm sure we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But let's give it a break for a while. Let's let that dead horse lie in the gutter for a while.
Yeah, leave him in peace. Yeah.
All right. So I'll talk to you later then.
All right, mate. Good talking to you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.